My name is Robin, and at 30, I never imagined I would be fighting my own family to protect my 8-year-old son Jake. After my wife died from cancer when Jake was 4, I devoted everything to being the best dad possible. We were doing okay, just the two of us, until that Sunday visit to my parents. When my sister beat Jake with a belt for spilling juice, I was horrified. But what broke me was hearing my mom laugh and seeing my dad defend her. If you are watching this, please drop a comment letting me know where you are from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join us on this journey of standing up for what is right. Life changed forever when my wife Emily was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. She had never smoked a day in her life, which made the diagnosis even more cruel. The doctors gave her a year, but she fought for almost 2, enduring rounds of chemotherapy that took her beautiful auburn hair and the radiation that burned her skin. Jake was only 4 when she passed away in her sleep, holding both our hands. I still remember his small voice asking when Mommy would wake up. After Emily died, I restructured my entire life around Jake. I left my high-stress marketing job in the city and took a position at a local agency that offered flexible hours and remote work options. The pay cut was substantial, but it meant I could be there for school drop-offs and pickups, attend every parent-teacher conference, and never miss bedtime. Some nights, I would sit outside Jake's room long after he fell asleep, listening to his breathing and wondering if I was doing enough, if Emily would approve of my parenting decisions. Our modest 3-bedroom house became a sanctuary for us. The 3rd bedroom I converted into an art studio for Jake, who showed an early interest in drawing. Like his mother, he had an eye for detail and color. On particularly difficult days, I would find him in there, drawing pictures of the 3 of us, preserving memories of a time when our family was whole. My relationship with my own family had always been complicated, but it became increasingly strained after Emily died. My sister Stephanie, 5 years younger than me at 25, had always been my parents' favorite. As the only daughter and the baby of the family, she received a level of indulgence that neither I nor our older brother Thomas ever experienced. Growing up, Stephanie could break an expensive vase and receive comfort rather than consequences. She could fail classes and my parents would blame the teachers. Her temper tantrums, which continued well into her teens, were dismissed as passion. This pattern of behavior continued into adulthood. When Stephanie dropped out of college to pursue a series of short-lived passions, my parents funded each new venture without question. When she totaled her 2nd car while texting, they bought her a 3rd. When she got into a physical altercation with a roommate that resulted in a night in jail, my father pulled strings with a friend at the police department to have the charges dropped. My mother Martha, now 58, was a former elementary school teacher who ruled our childhood home with strict expectations and quick punishment. Unless that child was Stephanie. My father Frank, a 60-year-old retired construction company owner, believed in traditional gender roles and hard discipline. I can still feel the sting of his belt across my back for infractions, as minor as a spilled drink or a forgotten chore. Despite our difficult history, I maintained contact with my parents because I wanted Jake to have grandparents in his life. Emily had been an only child whose parents died before Jake was born, so my family was his only connection to extended family. I limited our visits to once a month, usually for Sunday lunch, and I never left Jake alone with them. Something in me knew it wasn't safe, though I couldn't have predicted what would eventually happen. And I do life fairs, the something W. To half. The 7 once of. That to half, life. Knew me. Knew how. Jake was different from what my parents expected in a grandson. Quiet and thoughtful, he preferred reading and art to the sports and rough play my father considered appropriate for boys. Jake had his mother's sensitivity and empathy. He would cry when he saw injured animals, spend hours crafting homemade cards for his teachers, and share his snacks with classmates who forgot theirs. These qualities that made me so proud of him were seen as weaknesses by my parents. My mother would make comments about how I needed to toughen him up. My father would try to engage him in wrestling or catch, then grow frustrated when Jake showed no interest. Stephanie, despite having no children of her own, was the most vocal critic of my parenting. "Your son is going to get eaten alive in the real world," she would say within Jake's earshot. "You are raising him to be soft." Thomas, my older brother by 2 years, had pursued a career in finance and moved across the country. He had 2 sons who played football and hunted with my father during their annual visits. My parents never missed an opportunity to compare Jake's gentle nature unfavorably to his cousin's achievements in sports and academics. Each visit left Jake quieter, and each time I promised myself it would be the last. But then my mother would call about a holiday or my father's birthday, and guilt would pull us back. I always thought I could protect Jake from their judgment and criticism. I never imagined I would need to protect him from physical harm at the hands of my own sister, in my parents' house, with their approval. But looking back, all the warning signs were there, flashing red, in a pattern I chose to ignore for the sake of family peace. The call came on a Friday evening as Jake and I were making homemade pizza, our weekly tradition. My mother sounded concerned, explaining that my father had come down with a nasty flu and she needed help with some household tasks he normally handled. Could we come by on Sunday? It had been nearly 2 months since our last visit, and despite my reservations, I felt obligated to help. Jake surprised me by showing enthusiasm about seeing his grandparents. He had been working on a watercolor landscape in his art class and wanted to give it to my father. The painting showed a sunrise over mountains, with vibrant oranges and purples bleeding into a lightening sky. It was genuinely impressive for an 8-year-old, and Jake's art teacher had suggested he had real talent. "I can't wait to show Grandpa my painting," he said as he carefully placed it in a folder to keep it safe. "Do you think he'll like it?" I hesitated, knowing my father's likely reaction to art as a hobby for his grandson. "I'm sure he'll appreciate how hard you worked on it," I finally answered, unwilling to crush his excitement but equally unwilling to lie. As Sunday approached, I found myself creating mental escape plans. If my father made comments about Jake's interests, we would leave early. If my mother criticized my parenting, I would change the subject. I packed Jake's tablet with his favorite books and games in case he needed a retreat from their scrutiny. I even told him we only needed to stay for 2 hours, positioning it as a quick visit to help Grandma while Grandpa was sick. What I hadn't anticipated was Stephanie's presence. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, her flashy red sports car was parked haphazardly, taking up more space than necessary. Jake noticed it immediately. "Is Aunt Stephanie here?" he asked, his voice small with anxiety. The last time He'd seen her, she had mocked his fear of the family's large German shepherd, calling him a baby. "Looks like it," I replied, squeezing his shoulder gently. "Remember, if anyone says something that makes you feel bad, you come tell me right away, okay?" Jake nodded solemnly, clutching his painting closer to his chest. The moment we entered, I could feel the tension. My father was in his recliner, looking pale, but hardly at death's door. My mother was bustling around the kitchen, and Stephanie was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. No one immediately noticed our arrival until Jake politely called out, "Hi, Grandma. Hi, Grandpa." My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "There you are," she exclaimed, pulling Jake into a stiff hug before turning to me. "Robin, be a dear and fix that loose gutter on the back porch. Your father tried yesterday and nearly fell off the ladder. No hello. No thank you for coming. Just straight to the task at hand." I nodded, already regretting our decision to come. Stephanie looked up from her phone with a scowl. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with their presence," she drawled. Her eyes were slightly bloodshot, and I wondered if she had been drinking already, despite it being barely noon. "Hi, Stephanie," I said evenly. "I didn't know you'd be here today." She shrugged. "Jason and I broke up, so I needed a place to crash for a while." Her tone dared me to comment on yet another failed relationship. Jake, meanwhile, had approached my father and was carefully removing his painting from the folder. "Look what I made for you, Grandpa," he said hopefully. My father glanced at the artwork with barely concealed disinterest. "That's, nice," he muttered, then looked past Jake to me. "That gutter really needs fixing before the next rain." Jake's face fell, but he valiantly placed the painting on the coffee table. "I made it in art class. It's a sunrise in the mountains. Arts and crafts, huh?" Stephanie interjected with a snort. "Shouldn't you be playing baseball or something? It's spring, right?" I intervened before Jake could absorb more disapproval. Actually, Jake's team is taking a break right now. I lied. Jake had tried t-ball the previous year and hated every minute of it. And that painting is really good, buddy. Grandpa can hang it up once he's feeling better. My father grunted noncommittally. And I quickly directed Jake to help me with the gutter so we could minimize our time inside. The repair took less than 30 minutes. And when we returned, my mother was setting the table for lunch. The spread was impressive, I had to admit. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh rolls. My mother might have been emotionally withholding, but she could cook. As we sat down, the conversation turned to family news. Thomas and his family were planning a summer visit. My cousin Sarah was expecting her third child. The church my parents attended needed a new roof, and my father had been volunteered to head the fundraising committee before his illness. The atmosphere was tense, but manageable, until my father brought up discipline. Thomas says his boys haven't needed a spanking in years, he commented as he cut his meat. Just the threat is enough to keep them in line. That's how you raise respectful kids. Stephanie nodded vigorously. Kids today have no respect because parents are too soft. When we were growing up, we knew there would be consequences. My mother chimed in. Remember when Robin broke Mrs. Henderson's window with that baseball? Your father took his belt off right there in the front yard. Neighbors saw and everything. But it taught you a lesson, didn't it? I felt my face flush with the humiliating memory. I was 9 years old, and the spanking had left welts that made sitting painful for days. What it had taught me was to fear my father, not to respect property. We don't use physical punishment in our house, I said firmly, placing a protective hand on Jake's shoulder. Research shows it's harmful to children and doesn't actually teach them anything, except to be afraid. The table fell silent for a moment. Then Stephanie rolled her eyes. Research, she mimicked in a whiny voice. No wonder your kid is so sensitive. A little discipline would do him good. Jake shrank in his seat, pushing his food around his plate. I shot Stephanie a warning look. But she continued, seriously. When Thomas' kids were here last Christmas, they said please and thank you, helped clear the table without being asked, and didn't cry when they lost at cards. Meanwhile, your kid, that's enough, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. Jake is sitting right here, and his a wonderful, kind, creative child. I won't have him criticized for not fitting your narrow definition of how a boy should behave. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jake looked close to tears, and I considered making an excuse to leave early. But my mother, perhaps sensing my thoughts, quickly changed the subject to her garden plans for the spring. The conversation limped along for a few more minutes. Then it happened. Jake reached for his glass of grape juice, but his small hand misjudged the distance. The glass tipped, sending purple liquid cascading across the white tablecloth, some of it splashing onto Stephanie's designer jeans. Oh no! I'm sorry, Jake exclaimed, immediately grabbing his napkin to try to soak up the spill. Stephanie jumped to her feet with a shriek. You little brat, look what you've done. These jeans cost $300. Jake flinched backward, eyes wide with fear. It was an accident, I said quickly, standing up. Come on, Jake. Let's get some paper towels from the kitchen. Jake nodded frantically, eager to escape Stephanie's rage. As we hurried to the kitchen, I could hear her continuing to fume about her ruined clothing. My mother offered ineffectual comfort while my father muttered about clumsy kids. In the kitchen, Jake burst into tears. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. I didn't mean to. I knelt down to his level, wiping his tears away. Hey, it was just an accident. Accidents happen to everyone. Aunt Stephanie is overreacting. I was helping Jake clean grape juice off his shirt when I heard it, a sharp cry of pain that turned my blood to ice. The scream that tore through the house was unmistakably Jake's. It was a sound of pure terror and pain that no parent ever wants to hear. I dropped the paper towels and bolted from the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs as I raced toward the source of the cry. The scene that greeted me in the dining room stopped me cold. Jake was cowering against the wall, his small body curled into a protective ball. Stephanie stood over him, my father's leather belt gripped tightly in her hand. As I watched in horror, she brought it down again. The crack of leather against skin followed by another cry from my son. Jake's face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Angry red welts were already forming on his forearms, where Head tried to shield himself. Through his thin t-shirt, I could see more marks forming on his back and shoulders. Stephanie was red-faced with fury, her lips pulled back in a snarl. "This is what happens to disrespectful little brats," she was shouting. "You think you can ruin my clothes and not face consequences?" For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was beating my child with a belt, while my parents stood by. My father remained seated at the table, his expression grim but approving. My mother hovered nearby, her hands fluttering uselessly, but making no move to stop the assault. That split second of shock paralysis ended when Stephanie raised the belt again. Something primal and protective roared to life inside me. I lunged forward, crossing the room in 2 strides, and grabbed her wrist mid-swing. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, wrenching the belt from her grasp with such force that she stumbled backward. "Get away from my son." Stephanie regained her balance and glared at me, not a hint of remorse in her expression. "Someone needs to discipline him since you won't," she spat. A little correction never hurt anyone. I threw the belt across the room and shoved her away from Jake with more strength than it intended. Stephanie stumbled back against the dining table, knocking over a chair. I didn't care. All that mattered was getting to my son. Jake was still huddled against the wall, shaking violently. When I reached for him, he flinched before recognizing me. Then he launched himself into my arms, his small body racked with sobs. "Daddy," he cried, burying his face in my shoulder. "I'm here, buddy." "I'm right here," I whispered, holding him close while trying to assess his injuries. The marks on his arms were already darkening, and when I gently lifted the back of his shirt, I saw 5 distinct welts, one of which had broken the skin. Cold fury washed over me as I turned to face my family, keeping Jake securely in my arms. The room had fallen silent, except for Jake's muffled crying and Stephanie's heavy breathing. "What is wrong with you?" I demanded, looking from Stephanie to my parents. "He is 8 years old. He spilled a drink." My father cleared his throat. The boy needed to learn. "When you give in to this kind of behavior, he needed to learn?" I interrupted, incredulous. "Learn what? That the adults he should be able to trust will hurt him for an accident? That his family thinks it's okay to beat a child?" Stephanie rolled her eyes, smoothing her disheveled clothing. "Don't be so dramatic. It was just a few swats. We got way worse growing up." The casualness of her response, the complete lack of understanding of what she'd done, ignited something dangerous inside me. I carefully set Jake down, keeping him behind me. "I'm calling the police," I announced, pulling my phone from my pocket. "What you just did is assault. It's child abuse, and it's illegal." The word police changed the atmosphere instantly. Stephanie paled. My father stood up so quickly his chair fell backward, and my mother lunged for my phone. "Don't you dare," she cried, snatching it from my hand with surprising speed. "Don't call the police. It will ruin her life." I stared at my mother in disbelief. Ruin her life? What about my son's life? What about the trauma you've just inflicted on him? My mother laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that chilled me more than her words. "It was just a belt. Robin. We're all raised that way. And we turned out fine." "Fine," I echoed, gesturing wildly at Stephanie. "This is your definition of fine? A grown woman who thinks it's acceptable to beat a child over spilled juice?" My father stepped forward, his face darkening with anger. "You're raising a brat. Robin, you should be thanking your sister for stepping in where you failed." The words hit me like physical blows. They didn't see it. They couldn't see the wrongness of what had happened. In their minds, Stephanie was justified, and I was the problem. In that moment, I realized how deeply broken my family truly was, how warped their perception of love and discipline had become. Jake tugged at my shirt, still trembling. "Daddy, can we go home, please?" he whispered, his voice small and frightened. "Yes, buddy. We're leaving right now," I assured him, reaching for my phone, which my mother still clutched tightly. "Give me back my phone. Not until you calm down and promise not to do anything stupid," she replied, backing away. "Stupid?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "You think protecting my child from abuse is stupid?" "It's not abuse," Stephanie interjected. "It's discipline. There is a difference." I turned my attention to her, not bothering to hide my contempt. "Touch my son again, ever, and I promise you, I'll press charges so fast your head will spin. Now give me back my phone, or I'll use Dad's landline to call 911. My mother hesitated, then reluctantly handed over my phone. She looked older suddenly, lines of worry etched around her mouth. "Robin, please, think about what this would do to the family. We can work this out privately." I pocketed my phone and picked Jake up again, needing to feel him safe in my arms. His small body was still shaking, and I could feel dampness where his tears soaked through my shirt. The sight of the red marks on his arms, visible even now, strengthened my resolve. "There is no working this out," I said coldly. "What happened here today crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I may not call the police right now, but that's only because I need to take care of my son first." My father scoffed. "Always the dramatic one. A little discipline never hurt anyone. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I looked at him for a long moment, seeing clearly for the first time the cycle of abuse that had shaped our family for generations. In that moment, I made a silent vow that it would end with me. Jake would never know the sting of a belt, the humiliation of physical punishment, or the betrayal of those who should protect him. "We are leaving," I stated firmly. "And none of you are going to see Jake again until there's a serious acknowledgement of what happened here and genuine remorse. Which, frankly, I don't expect to see." With that, I gathered Jake's backpack and painting, still sitting forgotten on the coffee table, and headed for the door. I couldn't get us out of that house fast enough. The front door slammed behind us with a finality that matched my mood. I quickly secured Jake in the back seat of our car, checking once more for any severe injuries that might need immediate medical attention. The welts were angry and red, but the only broken skin was a small cut where the belt's edge had caught his shoulder blade. It would need cleaning, but it could wait until we were farther away from that house. I had just started the engine when the front door flew open, and my mother rushed out, followed more slowly by my father and Stephanie. My mother's expression was panicked now, the reality of what had happened, and my reaction to it finally sinking in. "Robin, wait," she called, hurrying down the walkway in her house slippers. "You're overreacting. Please, let's talk about this." I rolled down my window just enough to make my voice clear. "There's nothing to talk about. You stood by while Stephanie assaulted my child, and then you laughed about it." My mother clasped her hands together pleadingly. "It wasn't assault, honey. It was just discipline. When you were kids, your father used the belt all the time, and you turned out fine." Her words sent a fresh wave of anger through me. "I did not turn out fine, Mom. I spent years in therapy dealing with the fear and resentment I felt toward Dad. I flinched when teachers raised their hands in class. I had nightmares, and I swore I would never, ever do that to my own child." My father had reached the car now, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "If you disciplined the boy properly all along, this wouldn't have been necessary. Thomas never has these problems with his sons." The comparison to my brother, predictable as it was, still stung. "Because Thomas hits his kids? Is that what you're saying? Is the solution?" "We don't call it hitting," my mother interjected quickly. "It's proper discipline, and every child needs boundaries." I looked at her in disbelief. "Boundaries are not the same as violence, Mom. Jake has plenty of boundaries and consequences, but they don't include physical pain or humiliation." Stephanie had finally joined them, keeping a careful distance from my car. She had composed herself, her earlier rage replaced with a cold defensiveness. "The kid deliberately spilled his juice on me," she stated. "He saw how I reacted when he first spilled it on the table, and he did it again when you were in the kitchen. It was deliberate. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment, I could only stare at her. Jake was hiding behind me in the kitchen because he was afraid of your reaction to an accident, I said slowly, as if explaining to a child. He did not deliberately spill anything on you or anyone else. He needs to learn respect, my father insisted. When I was growing up, I cut him off sharply. I don't care how you were raised or what you think worked for you. The cycle stops with me. Jake will never be hit in the name of discipline. Not by me, and certainly not by any of you. I noticed Jake watching wide-eyed from the back seat, taking in every word. I lowered my voice, not wanting to frighten him further. I need to take him home now. We are done here. My mother grabbed the car door handle. If you make this into a legal issue, it will destroy this family, she warned, her voice trembling. Stephanie could lose her job. There would be investigations, questions. Is that what you want? What I want is for my child to be safe and respected, I replied evenly. I'm not interested in protecting people who hurt him, regardless of who they are. You would choose that boy over your own sister? My father demanded, his voice rising. Your own family? His words clarified everything for me. That boy was my son, my child, my family in the truest sense of the word. And yes, I would choose him over anyone who thought it was acceptable to harm him. Jake is my family, I said firmly. And right now, protecting him is my only priority. I raised my phone, quickly snapping several photos of the marks on Jake's arms. Evidence, in case I needed it later. My family recoiled, as if Id brandished a weapon. What are you doing? Stephanie hissed, suddenly looking frightened. Documenting what you did to my son, I answered calmly. Because regardless of what Mom thinks, what happened today was assault, and it's illegal in all 50 states. My mother began to cry, theatrical sobs that had often worked to manipulate me in the past. My father put his arm around her, glaring at me over her head. This is a betrayal, Robin, he said gravely. Family matters stay in the family. Always. Some things don't deserve to stay hidden, I replied, putting the car in reverse. And if any of you come near Jake again, you'll get a restraining order. I'm not kidding. As I backed out of the driveway, Stephanie shouted after me, This isn't over. I'll sue you for defamation if you spread lies about me. I didn't respond, focusing instead on driving safely despite my shaking hands. In the rearview mirror, I could see Jake watching the receding figures of his grandparents and aunt. His expression a mixture of confusion, hurt, and relief. Once we were on the main road, I pulled over in a shopping center parking lot to check on him properly. I turned in my seat to face him, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. How are you doing, buddy? Are you okay? Jake looked down at the marks on his arms, then back at me with eyes too old for his young face. Why did Aunt Stephanie hit me, Dad? Did I do something really bad? His question broke my heart. No, Jake. You did nothing wrong, I said firmly. Spilling your juice was an accident. And even if it wasn't, no one has the right to hit you. Ever. What Aunt Stephanie did was wrong, and Grandma and Grandpa were wrong to let it happen. Jake nodded slowly, processing my words. Are we still going to visit them? No. Not for a long time, I answered honestly. Not until they understand that what happened was wrong and promise it will never happen again. As I drove us home, my phone began buzzing with text messages and calls. My mother sent pleading messages begging me not to ruin Stephanie's life over a moment of lost temper. My father left a voicemail calling me ungrateful and weak. Stephanie alternated between threats of legal action and accusations that I was overprotective and raising Jake to be a sissy. I silenced my phone, focusing instead on what Jake needed. When we got home, I gently cleaned and bandaged the small cut on his shoulder, applied cooling aloe vera to the welts, and gave him children's ibuprofen for the pain. Then I held him while we watched his favorite animated movie, reassuring him with my presence that he was safe and loved. Later that night, after Jake had finally fallen asleep in my bed, because he was too frightened to sleep alone, I sat in the living room and cried. I cried for the scared child I'd once been, feeling the sting of my father's belt. I cried for Jake and the trust that had been broken, and I cried for the family I thought I had. now revealed to be something far darker and more damaged than I had allowed myself to see. As the tears subsided, they were replaced with cold, clear determination. This ends now, I promised silently. The cycle of violence and its normalization would stop with me, and I would do whatever was necessary to protect Jake, even if it meant cutting ties with the people who should have loved us both the most. Monday morning arrived with the heavy certainty of difficult decisions ahead. Jake woke up still subdued, wincing slightly as he moved. The welts had darkened overnight, and while they would heal, I knew the emotional wounds would take far longer. "Is it okay if I stay home from school today?" he asked quietly as I made him breakfast. His question was so unlike him. Jake loved school and rarely wanted to miss a day, even when he had a cold. "Of course, buddy," I replied gently. "I already called the school and told them you'd be out today. I took the day off work too, so we can hang out together." Relief washed over his face. "Will you tell my teacher what happened?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure how much to share with the school. While I wanted to be honest, I also needed to consider Jake's privacy and dignity. "I'm going to tell her you had a family emergency," I said carefully. "But Jake, we should talk about what happened yesterday and what we want to do about it." Jake pushed his cereal around in his bowl, not meeting my eyes. "Are you going to call the police on Aunt Stephanie?" The directness of his question surprised me. Jake was perceptive, had always been able to read situations with unusual clarity for his age. It was one of the qualities I most admired in him. Considering it, I answered honestly. What she did was wrong, and in our state, hitting a child with a belt is considered child abuse, which is against the law. Jake nodded slowly, processing this information. Would she go to jail? I sighed, sitting down beside him at the table. Maybe, but probably not for very long. More likely, she'd have to take special classes to learn better ways to handle her anger, and she might have to do community service. The most important thing would be making sure she can't hurt you again. His next question was even more difficult. Would I have to talk to people about what happened? Would I have to show them the marks? I reached out to squeeze his hand gently. If we decide to report this, yes, you'd probably have to talk to a police officer and maybe someone from Child Protective Services. They would need to see the injuries to document them. But I would be with you the whole time, and these people are trained to be very kind and understanding. Jake fell silent again, stirring his cereal until it turned to soggy mush. I could see him weighing options in his mind, his forehead creased with worry that no 8-year-old should have to carry. "Dad," he said finally, looking up at me. "I'm scared of seeing Aunt Stephanie again. And Grandma and Grandpa too. They didn't help me." His words settled my internal debate. Whatever the legal ramifications, whatever family fallout might result, my primary responsibility was to Jake and his sense of safety. "You won't have to see any of them unless you want to," I assured him. "And not until I'm absolutely certain they understand what they did wrong and that it can never happen again." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone began to ring. My mother's number flashed on the screen. I'd already missed 3 calls from her since waking up, along with a barrage of text messages alternating between guilt trips and attempts at reconciliation. This time, I decided to answer. "Jake, go ahead and watch some TV while I take this call, okay?" He nodded, clearly relieved to escape the difficult conversation. Once he was settled in the living room, I took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Robin, finally," my mother exclaimed. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. How is Jake? How are you?" Her concerned tone made anger flare in my chest. "Jake has welts all over his arms and back," I replied coldly. "He's afraid to go to school because he doesn't want to explain his injuries." "How do you think he is?" My mother sighed heavily. "I understand you're upset, but you're blowing this way out of proportion. Kids are resilient. He'll be fine in a day or two." Her dismissal of Jake's trauma pushed me to the edge of my control. "That's not how this works, Mom. You can't beat a child and expect them to just get over it. Nobody beat him," she objected. "It was discipline, Robin. Something you clearly don't understand." I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice level. "Mom, Hitting a child with a belt is legally considered child abuse in our state. It doesn't matter what you call it or what your intentions were. If I reported what Stephanie did, she could face criminal charges. There was a long pause before my mother spoke again, her voice tight with fear. You're not actually going to the police, are you? Think about what that would do to this family, to your sister. I'm thinking about my son, I replied. And the fact that none of you have shown any remorse or understanding about how wrong this was. What do you want, Robin? She demanded. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry Jake got upset. Stephanie is sorry she lost her temper. Can we move on now? Her words confirmed what I already knew. They didn't get it. They would never get it. In their minds, the real problem was my reaction, not the violence against my child. No, Mom, we can't just move on. Until all of you truly understand why what happened was wrong, Jake and I need space from this family. You can't keep our grandson from us, my father bellowed, apparently listening on another extension. We have rights. The irony of him claiming rights while dismissing Jake's right to safety was not lost on me. Actually, I can keep Jake away, I stated firmly. I have full custody and every legal right to decide who has access to my son. Right now, none of you have shown me you're safe people for him to be around. You ungrateful, self-righteous, my father began. But my mother cut him off. Robin, please, she pleaded. Come by the house tonight. We can talk this through like adults. Bring Jake so he can see Stephanie apologize. The suggestion that I would bring Jake back to the scene of his trauma so soon was the final straw. I'm not bringing Jake anywhere near Stephanie, I said flatly. And I'm not coming over tonight or any night until there's a real acknowledgement of what happened and genuine remorse, not this manipulative damage control. I hung up despite my mother's continued protests. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. If you tell anyone about this, I'll deny everything and say you're the abusive one. Remember that time Jake had a bruise from falling off his bike? Wonder how that would look to CPS. The threat sent a chill through me. She'd go that far to protect herself, to twist reality, and potentially put Jake at risk of being removed from his home? The sister I thought I knew, despite her flaws, would never have threatened her nephew's stability so callously. I took photos of her text as evidence, then blocked her number. When my mother called again, I sent her to voicemail and blocked her too. Same for my father. I needed clarity, and I needed advice from someone who wasn't emotionally entangled in the situation. While Jake watched TV, I called my closest friend, Michael, a family law attorney who had helped me with paperwork after Emily's death. After explaining the situation, I asked bluntly, "What would you do if this were your child?" His answer was immediate and unequivocal. I'd document everything, get medical documentation of the injuries, and file for a restraining order against the sister at minimum. Whether to pursue criminal charges would depend on what you and Jake can handle emotionally. But either way, I'd make it crystal clear to the whole family that access to your child is a privilege, not a right. And it's one they've lost. His words solidified my resolve. Jake needed to see that I would stand up for him, that I would put his safety and well-being above family politics or appearances. He needed to know that what happened to him mattered and would have consequences. When I hung up, I made my decision. I would document Jake's injuries professionally, seek a restraining order against Stephanie, and make it clear to my parents that their access to Jake was contingent on genuine remorse and changed behavior. Jake emerged from the living room as I was jotting down my plan of action. "Dad?" he asked hesitantly. "Are you still mad?" I set down my pen and opened my arms. He climbed into my lap, something he hadn't done in over a year, claiming he was too big now. But trauma had made him small again, seeking the comfort of a father's protection. "I'm not mad at you, Jake." "Not at all," I assured him, holding him close. "I'm angry at Aunt Stephanie for hurting you, and at Grandma and Grandpa for letting it happen. But that anger is going to help me make sure you're safe." Jake nodded against my chest. Then, with the simple wisdom of children, he asked, "Can we go get ice cream?" I smiled, grateful for the reminder that, despite everything, he was still an 8-year-old boy who found comfort in small pleasures and routines. "Absolutely," I said, ruffling his hair gently. Ice cream sounds perfect right now. As we headed out to the car, I glanced back at the notes I'd been making. My family would hate me for the stand I was about to take. There would be anger, accusations, and probably long-term estrangement. But watching Jake settle into his seat, still wincing slightly from his injuries, I knew without doubt that I was making the right choice. Some family ties needed to be severed for healing to begin. The urgent care center's reception area was quiet for a Monday afternoon, with only a few other patients waiting their turn. Jake sat beside me, clutching the tablet I'd loaded with his favorite games, his hood pulled up despite the warm spring temperature. I knew he was trying to hide, to make himself invisible to curious eyes that might notice the marks on his arms. The intake nurse called us back promptly, her expression shifting from routine professionalism to concern as I explained why we were there. She led us to an exam room where Jake reluctantly removed his hoodie to reveal the full extent of his injuries, now entering their second day and darkened to a mottled purple. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked Jake gently, gloved fingers hovering above but not touching the welts. Jake looked to me for guidance, and I nodded encouragingly. "You can tell her the truth, buddy. It's okay." He took a deep breath. "My aunt hit me with a belt because I spilled juice," he said, his voice small but steady. "It was an accident. But she got really mad." The nurse maintained her professional demeanor, but I caught the flash of anger in her eyes before she masked it. "Thank you for telling me," she said, making notes on her tablet. "The doctor will be in shortly to examine you." When she stepped out, Jake looked at me anxiously. "Is she going to call the police?" I squeezed his hand. "Not right away. But the doctor is what we call a mandatory reporter, which means if they see signs that a child has been hurt, they have to report it to Child Protective Services. It's their job to help keep kids safe." The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient movements, entered a few minutes later. She examined Jake thoroughly, documenting each welt and the small cut with photographs and detailed notes. She spoke directly to Jake, asking him questions about what happened, how many times he'd been struck, and who else was present. Jake answered honestly, his composure occasionally breaking when he described how his grandparents had watched without intervening. Through it all, I sat beside him, a steadying hand on his shoulder, fighting back my own emotions to stay strong for him. After the examination, the doctor asked to speak with me privately. Jake was settled in the exam room with his tablet and a juice box, while the doctor and I stepped into the hallway. "I'm required to report this to CPS," she said without preamble. "The injuries are consistent with the account you've both given, and they exceed what would be considered reasonable discipline even in states with more lenient corporal punishment laws." I nodded, having expected this. "I understand. What happens next?" "A CPS caseworker will likely contact you within 24 hours. They'll want to interview both you and Jake, and possibly visit your home." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Since you're the non-offending parent who sought medical attention and is acting protectively, it's unlikely they'll have concerns about Jake's placement with you. But you should be prepared for an investigation." "And my sister? My parents?" I asked. "Will there be consequences for them?" The doctor chose her words carefully. "CPS will investigate the entire situation. If they substantiate the abuse allegation, there could be various outcomes, from mandated parenting and anger management classes to criminal charges, depending on the severity and circumstances. The fact that this was a one-time incident might factor in, but the use of an object and the presence of marks are significant concerns." She handed me discharge paperwork, along with a brochure on childhood trauma and a referral to a child psychologist. "For now, keep the welts clean and apply the antibiotic ointment in prescribing to the cut. The psychological impact may last longer than the physical injuries, so I strongly recommend following up with the therapist." I thanked her, tucking the papers into my pocket. As we left the clinic, I felt simultaneously drained and empowered. The medical documentation was the first concrete step in protecting Jake, not just today, but for the future. That afternoon, while Jake napped, exhausted from the emotional strain of the doctor's visit, I called the non-emergency police line to file a report. The officer who took my statement was professional but compassionate, explaining that given the nature of the incident and the documented injuries, a detective would be assigned to investigate. "Do you want to press charges against your sister?" he asked. The question gave me pause. Part of me wanted Stephanie to face the full legal consequences of her actions, but another part considered what a prolonged legal process might mean for Jake. The additional stress and repeated interviews it would require. "I want whatever will ensure my son's safety going forward," I answered carefully. "And I want it officially documented that this happened, so there's a record if anything similar ever occurs in the future." The officer assured me all options remained open, and I could decide about pressing formal charges after speaking with the detective and CPS caseworker. By evening, I'd received calls from both agencies, scheduling visits for the following day. I also contacted Michael again, who agreed to be present for both interviews as a legal advisor and support person. His final advice before hanging up stayed with me. "Document everything, Robin. Every call, every text, every interaction with your family from here on out, and consider filing for a temporary restraining order first thing tomorrow." The courts take child abuse very seriously, especially when there's medical documentation. That night, more messages arrived from my family. My mother had moved from pleading to angry accusations, claiming I was destroying the family out of spite. My father threatened to cut me out of his will if I pursued legal action against Stephanie. And Stephanie herself, apparently using a friend's phone to bypass my block, sent a single message: "Y'all regret this." I forwarded everything to Michael without responding, then checked on Jake one last time before trying to get some sleep myself. He was finally resting peacefully, clutching the stuffed lion Emily had given him shortly before she died. Looking at him, so small in his bed, the fading marks of violence still visible on his arms, I felt a renewed surge of determination. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. The CPS caseworker, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Torres, arrived promptly at 9. She interviewed me first. Then Jake, asking detailed questions about the incident, our home life, and my relationship with my extended family. She examined Jake's injuries, now beginning to fade but still clearly visible, and took additional photographs for her records. While she was thorough, she was also kind, especially with Jake. By the end of her visit, she confirmed what the doctor had suggested. "Mr. Matthews, I'm not concerned about Jake's safety in your care," she said as she prepared to leave. "You've taken all the appropriate protective actions. My concern is with your extended family and ensuring they don't have unsupervised access to Jake moving forward." "That's my concern too," I assured her. "I'm planning to file for a restraining order against my sister today." Miss Torres nodded approvingly. "I'd recommend including your parents in that order as well, given their role in facilitating the abuse and their continued defense of the perpetrator. My report will recommend against any unsupervised contact with any of them until they've completed appropriate interventions." After she left, the detective arrived to take formal statements. His interview was more focused on potential criminal charges, and he was direct about the possible outcomes. "Based on the evidence and statements, there's sufficient cause to charge your sister with assault on a minor," he explained. "It's a Class A misdemeanor in our state, punishable by up to a year in jail, though first-time offenders typically receive probation and mandatory counseling. The decision to press charges is ultimately yours, though the district attorney has final say." Jake, who had been quiet throughout most of the interview, suddenly spoke up. "Would Aunt Stephanie have to say sorry if she got in trouble?" The detective glanced at me before answering carefully. "She would have to acknowledge what she did was wrong, yes. And the court would probably order her to get help so she doesn't hurt other children." Jake seemed to consider this deeply. "I don't want her to go to jail," he said finally. "I just don't want her to hurt any kids again." His compassion, even after everything had endured, brought tears to my eyes. The detective nodded respectfully at Jake, treating his opinion with the same gravity had given mine. "That's very thoughtful of you, son. I'll make sure the DA knows that's how you feel." After the detective left, Michael arrived to accompany us to the courthouse. The process of filing for a temporary restraining order was bureaucratic but straightforward, especially with Michael's guidance. The judge, after reviewing the medical documentation and police report, granted an immediate temporary order protecting Jake from Stephanie, to be followed by a hearing in 2 weeks for a permanent order. I hesitated about including my parents, despite Miss Torres' recommendation. They hadn't physically harmed Jake themselves, and despite their terrible judgment, I wasn't sure if completely cutting them off was necessary. Michael sensed my uncertainty. "Your parents enabled the abuse, Robin. They stood by and watched, then defended the abuser. Legally and morally. That's nearly as problematic as the act itself," I sighed, knowing he was right. They hadn't protected Jake when he needed them. Until they understood the gravity of their failure, they couldn't be trusted with his well-being. In the end, I filed for a temporary order against all 3 family members, specifying no contact with Jake in any form, direct or indirect. As we left the courthouse, the weight of what I'd done settled on my shoulders. I'd taken decisive action to protect my son, but at the cost of severing ties with my entire family of origin. The right choice was also the painful one. Jake seemed to sense my emotional turmoil. As we walked to the car, he slipped his small hand into mine and squeezed. "Thanks for keeping me safe, Dad," he said simply. His words were all the confirmation I needed. No matter what came next, no matter how my family reacted, or what bridges I'd permanently burned, protecting Jake was worth it. As his father, it was not just my legal obligation but my sacred duty, one I'd fulfill regardless of personal cost. That evening, as news of the restraining order reached my family, the messages turned from manipulative to threatening. Michael advised me to document everything, but not respond. "Let the legal process work," he counseled. "Any contact now could complicate things." Later, after I'd tucked Jake in for the night, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the paperwork that documented our family's fracture. Medical reports, police statements, court orders. These would be our legacy now, not holiday gatherings or shared memories. The realization brought a profound sadness, but not regret. I picked up a framed photo of Emily holding newborn Jake, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. What would she think of all this? I wondered. The answer came immediately. With absolute certainty, she would have done exactly the same thing. Protecting our son would always come first, no matter the cost. With that thought, I put away the paperwork and went to bed, prepared to face whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The hardest steps had been taken. Now we would walk the path forward together, Jake and I, building a future where he would always feel safe, valued, and protected. 6 months passed with remarkable speed. Summer gave way to fall. Trees outside our window flamed with red and gold, and Jake started 3rd grade with a new teacher and a renewed sense of security. The physical marks of that terrible Sunday had long since faded. Though the emotional healing took more time, the restraining order against Stephanie was made permanent, following a tense court hearing where she finally, under oath and facing the evidence, admitted to striking Jake with the belt. The judge ordered her to complete an intensive anger management program and parenting classes, despite her protests that she didn't even have children. "Your behavior demonstrates you need these skills regardless," the judge had stated firmly. My parents, faced with similar restrictions, had initially doubled down on their defense of Stephanie and traditional discipline, but something shifted after the hearing, where they'd heard Jake testify in a small, steady voice about his fear and confusion that day. My mother contacted me through Michael, asking if there was any path to reconciliation. I established firm conditions. They would need to complete grandparenting classes, focused on modern child development and discipline techniques. They would need to acknowledge, without qualification, that physical punishment was harmful and wrong. And they would need to prioritize Jake's emotional safety above their own preferences and traditions. To my surprise, they agreed. Whether from genuine revelation or simply the desire to see their grandson again, they enrolled in the recommended programs and began the slow process of education and reflection. Our first supervised visit 3 months after the incident was awkward but hopeful. My father, a man I'd never seen apologize for anything, knelt to Jake's height and said simply, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I was wrong, and am learning to do better." Jake, with the remarkable capacity for forgiveness that children often possess, had accepted the apology with a solemn nod. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, though. He still preferred to have me present during visits, and he became anxious if my father raised his voice even in excitement. Small steps, the therapist reminded us. Healing happens gradually. Stephanie remained more resistant to change. While she completed her court-mandated programs, her apologies always contained qualifiers. I was just doing what was done to us, or I didn't realize how sensitive kids are these days. Jake, with wisdom beyond his years, was cautious around her. "I'm not ready to see Aunt Stephanie alone," he told me after a particularly strained supervised visit. "Maybe when I'm older." I honored his boundaries without question. The therapist had emphasized the importance of giving Jake agency in his relationships, especially after an experience where his autonomy and physical safety had been violated. He needed to know that his voice mattered, that he had the right to determine who had access to him and under what conditions. The incident had ripple effects beyond our immediate family. My brother Thomas called from across the country after hearing what happened, initially defensive of our parents, until I sent him the photographs of Jake's injuries. After a long silence, Head asked quietly if his own sons had ever shown fear of physical discipline during their visits with our parents. The question itself revealed an awareness I'd never expected from my traditionally minded brother. No family exists in isolation, and word inevitably spread through extended relatives and family friends. Some rallied around my parents and Stephanie, condemning me as overprotective and dramatic. Others reached out with support and, disturbingly often, their own stories of normalized abuse within families. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years called to tell me she'd wished someone had protected her that way when she was a child. Jake's recovery, meanwhile, progressed with professional help. The child psychologist specialized in trauma, using play therapy and age-appropriate cognitive techniques to help Jake process what had happened and develop healthy coping strategies. The nightmares that had plagued him in the early weeks gradually subsided. His flinch response when adults moved too quickly near him diminished. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. During an art therapy session, Jake painted a picture of a small lion cub surrounded by larger animals with sharp teeth and claws. But standing between the cub and the threatening creatures was a full-grown lion, fierce and protective. "That's you, Dad," Jake explained, pointing to the adult lion. "You keep the scary things away." The therapist later told me that Jake's perception of me as a consistent protector was one of the most important factors in his recovery. Children who experience trauma but have at least one adult who believes and defends them are significantly more resilient, she explained. "You've given him that security." My own healing journey was more complicated. I enrolled in a support group for parents of traumatized children, where I could share my anger, guilt, and grief with others who truly understood. I worked with a therapist to process my own childhood experiences with physical discipline, recognizing how they'd normalized violence in a way that had initially made me hesitate to take decisive action. I learned to forgive myself for that moment's hesitation in the dining room, for not immediately recognizing the severity of what was happening, and I learned to honor the strength it had taken to break the cycle, to stand firm against family pressure and cultural normalization of physical punishment. As fall deepened toward winter, Jake and I established new traditions and connections. We joined a community center where Jake took art classes, and I found friends who became like family, supportive adults who cared about Jake and respected the boundaries we'd established. We spent Thanksgiving with my colleague Sarah and her blended family, where discipline involved timeouts and privilege losses, never raised hands or belts. By December, the legal aspects of our ordeal were largely resolved. Stephanie had completed her mandated programs, and the criminal charges were suspended conditional on her continued compliance. My parents had made significant progress in their education and understanding, though our relationship remained fundamentally changed, built now on careful respect rather than assumed access. On a snowy Sunday, almost exactly 6 months after the incident, Jake and I sat together on our living room floor, working on a complex Lego set Head received as an early Christmas gift. He'd been quiet all morning, focused on the intricate construction, but I sensed something on his mind. "Dad," he said finally, placing a small blue brick with precision, "do you think people can really change?" The question caught me by surprise with its depth. I considered carefully before answering. "I think people can learn and grow," I said. They can understand why something they did was wrong and work hard not to repeat those mistakes. But it takes real effort and a genuine wish to be better. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Like Grandma and Grandpa, they seem different now. Yes. They are trying to change how they think about parenting and discipline. They're learning that there are better ways to teach children than the ways they were taught. And Aunt Stephanie? He pressed. I sighed, not wanting to lie but needing to be age-appropriate in my explanation. Stephanie is having a harder time changing. She went to the classes the judge ordered, but real change happens inside, in how you think about things. I don't think she's there yet. Jake absorbed this, continuing to build methodically. After several minutes, he spoke again. I'm glad you didn't change, Dad. You've always been the good kind of dad. His words filled me with an emotion too complex to name. Pride and humility, gratitude and determination all mingled together. I hadn't always known exactly what to do, but it followed my most important guiding principle. Protect Jake, no matter what. Sometimes love means standing firm when everyone around you is telling you to give in, I told him. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to people who are stronger or more powerful when you know they're wrong. Like you did with Grandpa, Jake observed. He was really mad, but you didn't let him scare you. I was scared, I admitted. But being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right, even when you're afraid. Jake put down his Lego piece and looked at me directly. I'm not afraid anymore, Dad. Not like I was. And I wanted to say thank you for fighting for me. I pulled him into a gentle hug, my throat tight with emotion. I will always fight for you, Jake. Always. That's my promise. As we returned to our building project, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The path had been difficult, painful at times, but ultimately transformative. Id learned that protecting a child sometimes meant standing against your own family. Id learned that generational patterns of harm could be broken with sufficient courage and support. And Id learned that healing, while rarely linear or complete, was possible with love, time, and professional help. Most importantly, Id learned that sometimes true love isn't just about comfort and protection. Sometimes it's about having the courage to face conflict and disapproval in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. It's about establishing boundaries even when they hurt. About choosing what's right over what's comfortable or expected. Looking at Jake, now happily immersed in his creation, I knew that this was the most valuable lesson I could pass on to him. That love requires courage. That family should mean safety, not fear. That he deserved protection, respect, and gentleness, no matter what traditions or authorities claimed otherwise. As snow continued to fall outside our window, creating a peaceful blanket over the neighborhood, I felt a sense of contentment that had been missing for a long time. We had weathered the storm together, Jake and I, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever challenges the future held, we would face them with the knowledge that we had already overcome something profound, and we had done it together. If this story resonates with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message of protection and healing. Have you ever had to take a stand to protect someone you love, even when it was difficult? Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you found value in this story, please like and subscribe for more conversations about family dynamics, healing, and the courage it takes to break harmful cycles. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is standing firm in defense of those who need protection.